Northern's Books here, and I want to share with you how I have been breaking down the absolutely gigantic number of characters, words, and expressions that you have to learn if you want to be able to read or listen to any decent level Chinese text. Essentially, if you're learning Spanish and you're English, or if you're learning German and you're Dutch, you have to learn, as we all know, thousands of new words. But they pale in comparison to the sheer vast quantity that you have to learn if you're learning a language like Chinese. There are thousands of Chinese characters, and they can be combined, most of them in many different ways, to create thousands and tens of thousands of words, and also thousands, absolutely thousands of idioms. What I've been using to fairly good effect for a few months now is a combination of two websites. The first one is called Yabla, as you see here on the screen, and the second one is called Context Reverso. So I've already got Yabla set to Chinese, although you can learn each of the following languages if you so desire, although it works best with Chinese, in my opinion. You click on Dictionary, and say you're at an intermediate level, where you already know a certain number of words and characters, you know what tones are and so on, and you have one particular word that you learned that has a character, and you just can't seem to remember it. For example, you have the word for news or information, which is this word here. What you simply do is you search the pinyin for, at the very least, the first character in the word, and Yabla will give you a list of characters that fit that pinyin in essentially a descending order of frequency. So you see here the very first word at the top, news, is very common. If we scroll all the way down to the 50th word, we get even a different character that sounds the same, and we also clearly have words to clamor, sales volume, throughout the night, words or expressions that are a bit less common than the word news. I then click on the character itself, so now we make sure we have the character we want to research, we want to learn more about, popped up, and not just the pinyin. And we see once again in descending order of frequency all the different words and expressions, idioms, that use this character. It's pretty incredible. It's not perfect, as any website isn't when it comes to essentially being an online dictionary. There are some very rare mistakes, but in general I found the website to be of incredibly high quality. And let's say that you've learned this first word, 消息, which is news or information, and you want to learn other words that use that same character because you can't help but to forget that first character, 消, every time. So what you want to do is you scroll down, and one by one, you look through all the words and expressions that you see, and you add them to your SRS. For most people, that would be Anki, your spaced repetition program. One by one, you add them into your deck, and then you study them from there. Of course, there are so many expressions on this website that I can recommend using a second website, Context Reversal, to help you. So, for example, let's say I want to look up this. It says this is a way of saying to cancel or a cancellation. If I put it in here, one of two things will happen. I'll either get a number of different sentences that roughly translated into English mention that this term is about canceling or a cancellation, or sometimes you won't get anything at all. Context Reverso is far from perfect, and they don't have an infinitely large bank of sentences to use for translations. In general, as a rule of thumb, if there are no translations available on Context Reversal, that suggests to me that the word or the term is uncommon enough that it might not be worth learning. If that's the case, I ignore it. I move on to the next word in the list that I find interesting. But as we see here, clearly this seems to mean what Yabla tells us it means. So I copy paste. I open up my Anki. See here, I have all my decks. My Chinese deck is called Hanping Chinese HSK because I initially downloaded a pre-made deck and I've been adding and modifying it. And I click on Add, and you can add the cards as you wish, assuming you know how to use Anki. if I want to look up all the cards that I have that use, for example, one particular character, like this character here, which was used in both news and cancel, I can see a list of all the cards I have that use that character. So if you have a new character that only appears one time in either the course that you're taking in university or in a private institution, or in the deck that you're already using on Anki, or in any textbook you're using, I recommend looking that character up and looking up other common words that use it. This way, you get many more chances to see the character in use in different ways, and it makes you more comfortable with all the different ways that that character can be used. If you just see this character here, Xiao, in news and information, then later on you might be very confused when you have it being used in, for example, this verb, to disappear or to fade away, or to die out, or fire station, or anything like that. You might be wondering, how the heck do I get from there to there? Obviously, the meaning of that character has a couple of dimensions to it, depending on what other characters it's being combined with. So, in summary, you go on Yabla, you look up using Pinyin, you find the character you want, you then search for that character, and you go through and you add all the words that contain that same character, making sure, of course, that they're at the very least used in common texts. Because if they're never used anywhere, they might be some idiom from 200 years ago that no one really uses anymore, that any modern Chinese speaker would probably not even recognize. Alternatively, if you don't want to use reversal context, because as you can see, the Chinese here is in beta, it's not perfect, you can also simply put the words, the characters, into Google. You can either, especially if it's something that you feel could be represented by an image, like a bird of some type or some kind of object, you can see if Google Images seems to give you that particular translation or interpretation of the characters that you see on Yabla. If it seems to fit, then, at least as far as I'm concerned, it's good enough, and you can add it to your deck. I like to keep doing this until I have, at least for most characters in my deck, about 4 or 5 or 6 good words, expressions, verbs, etc. that I have for each character, so that if I use SRS like Anki and I eventually get to the point where it's months or many weeks between each time I see a particular card, I don't start forgetting the character. Because we're competing in a way with native Chinese speakers who have had decades and decades of their lives seeing these characters all the time, for it to slowly seep into their brain, we have to sort of force it into our brain much faster. By using many different words and expressions with the same characters, you'll get to see those characters more often and in more different ways, and it's essentially a more complete way of learning them. Last caveat I can mention, obviously this does not in any way replace mass reading, mass listening, mass speaking. None of this is going to get you fluent in Chinese by itself. But if you do use a program like Anki, and I do for something like Chinese, I highly recommend you do, this would absolutely help you speed up the rate at which you can learn